As a dungeon master, how do you find the right balance with your encounters, between your encounters being too hard and too easy? Too hard meaning your party ends up getting wiped out, probably pretty quickly, or too easy where the players, barely break a sweat in the combat encounter. So, as a dungeon master, how do you work that balance? That's what we're going to be talking about on this episode of the Every 10 Day campaign, which you can check here on our YouTube account. We've got it listed as Campaign 1, which we started streaming here on YouTube from episode 100 onwards. If you want to listen in on any and all of the episodes before then, you can check out our podcast by going to podcast.every10day.com. And as the dungeon master and also as the dad of the players, what I'm really interested in is how do I make the game fun and engaging for my kids, where I'm not wearing the dad hat anymore. And if you're playing with your kids, you're not playing the parent hat. You're actually able to bond and connect with your children at a whole nother level. There's a lot of stuff out there online about playing Dungeons & Dragons with your friends. And quite honestly, this channel isn't about trying to duplicate any of that content you've probably heard before, or you can go and get from some really excellent creators here on YouTube. Very few people are talking about, what if you're playing D&D with young adventurers? That might be your kids, or you might be kids playing together, maybe even siblings playing together, brothers, sisters, cousins, all sorts of relatives, right? And you want to get your parents involved. How does all that happen? Well, that's what Behind the Screen is all about. This is really an opportunity to give you, our Dungeon Master, my Dungeon Master tips for how to play with your kids, how to play when, how to play when you're playing with people that you might ordinarily be, disciplining, or, tell them to go tidy their room, that kind of thing. This is how we got playing D&D, me with my kids, Charlotte and Finley, who played Danae and Elowin in our Every 10 Day campaign. And, the whole reason we got playing was because I started playing when I was 10 years old with my brother. And so I started D&D in the family first. Then I took it to friends. Then I started playing with friends. And, these Q&As, it's really all about answering those questions to help you become a better dungeon master, especially. Now, you can take these tips. You can take this advice if you're playing with your friends. And in fact, in the last 2 episodes, I would say, we covered stuff on storytelling, on how to work out dynamics of personality and work your characters out, and so much more. And, one of the things that I found is much of the advice in the other Behind the Screen episodes will work for you if you're playing with your friends. Take it, of course. There's plenty of other stuff out there, but take ours if it helps you with your game. In this episode, we're going to be looking at, as Dungeon Master in your game, right? Whether you're playing with your friends or, as we hope, with your family as well, right? As a Dungeon Master, how do you make your combat encounters balanced? Is that the word, balanced? I think maybe it is. And what we're going to look at is, how do we make sure that it's not just too hard, not too easy? Well, let's get into it with this episode of Behind the Screen. Many of these questions come to us through our Discord, where if you'd like to come and chat with our players, ask me any questions, submit some of your questions for answer on future episodes, you can do. Also, if you're watching us live on YouTube or even on the recording, you can ask your questions in the comments. And, if we are no longer live, the answers will be in text, obviously. But if you happen to join me live right now, or at any point during this live stream, you can ask a question in the comments and I'll give you an answer right here, right now. For the most part, though, we're going to be talking about combat. And the short answer to how do I make my combat, how do we balance encounters so that they're not too hard, not too easy? The short answer is, I don't. Well, that was the shortest video we've ever done. Boo! Seriously, I don't try and make my encounters hard or easy, which, by the way, I think if you make an encounter too hard or too easy, what I think the question really is how do you make your encounters fun? How do you make them fun? Because I think the big problem for a lot of dungeon masters is that they're trying too hard to create a balanced encounter. And I think if you're trying to balance the encounter just right, actually, that's how you take all the fun out of the encounter. Sometimes a too easy encounter can be fun. Sometimes a too hard encounter can be maybe not fun, but certainly entertaining. That's what Dungeons and Dragons, I think, is all about. I think way too much time and attention is put in trying to balance everything in encounters, trying to make it just this sweet spot of challenging, but not too challenging, not too challenging and not under challenging, And I think in that effort to try and perfectly balance an encounter, something all too often gets lost, in my experience. So the short answer to James, how do I make, my combat encounters as Dungeon Master not too hard, not too easy? Don't. Here's what I mean by this. I'm going to take from a couple of examples in our recent campaign. Now, remember, you can catch from episode 100 onwards that we streamed live on YouTube. You can catch it right here on our channel. Just subscribe to our channel. You'll get a notification next time we go live. Obviously, we're here in the UK. We tend to go live at a time that is okay, that isn't too painful for our transatlantic friends over there in the USA. Our friends in Australasia. Sorry about that. No, you have to get up in the middle of the night. But we tend to go in the afternoon here, so it's usually the morning for our friends in the US. But here's the thing. I'm going to pick from a couple of examples from our campaign, many of which you can actually check from our episode 100 onwards, which I think will illustrate this. Episode 100 in our campaign 1 is called Goblins Attack. Now, at this point, our two main characters, represented by and played by our two main players, my daughter and my son, Charlotte and Finley, who played Danaea, the paladin, and Elwyn, the wizard. And, episode 100, they get ambushed by goblins. And in episode 100, they have something like between them, just Danaea and Elwyn here, they've got at this point something like 50 levels between them. I think they've got about 25 levels of experience. I'll answer questions about epic levels and how I handle that, which I have done tentatively in previous episodes, but I'll certainly talk more to that in a future episode if you'd like me to. I think it was either in episode 1 or 2. I touched on it a little bit. Big fan of epic levels. And especially if you've got two players. If you've only got two players like I have, bottom line is if you cap it at 20th level, there's a lot of stuff that can still absolutely muller your players before they even ever get on to some of the really, high challenge rating beasts. So I allow advancement way beyond 20th level and multiples of that in multi-classing if you want. A lot of people raise an eyebrow to that, but trust me, try playing just two players at 20th level, and either you balance it with a ton of NPCs, which is really hard to keep track of as DM, or you just let them level up. Anyway, episode 100, right? Episode 100 is goblins ambush the group. And in fact, Nimblefoot, the main NPC and PC, DM PC, my original character from 1987, who is an NPC in my kids campaign, actually took a crossbow, I think, to the shoulder or something, because he was just on a boat smoking a pipe, and one of these goblins just shot him. And I didn't roll for any of that. I just thought it would be funny. And this is my thing. I knew that our players would have no problem with a load of goblins. And by the way, there were a lot of goblins. I mean, I set something like 30 or 40 of these things. The playboard was covered in miniatures. I've got my Pathfinder cut out little cardboard miniatures, and I was using them all. I was having to dip into like kobold miniatures and stuff just to try and populate the mass of goblins that were ambushing. And I knew even with 30 goblins, there's no chance in hell that they're going to hurt either of my players at all. It's not going to hurt their characters whatsoever. But it was fun. And here was what was more fun, is that it was a chance for the the characters have a bit of a scrap, which was just a laugh. I mean, what isn't fun about killing goblins? I don't know, nothing as far as I'm concerned. And here was the thing: there was a goblin that the two players had encountered and let go way back. We're going back to the beginning of, when did we start playing? January 2019, right? When we started the shows aren't in the podcast. And the characters, actually interacted with the goblin and they let him go. His name was Greb the goblin. He talks like this. He talks really weirdly, like this. And anyway, I don't know why I love that voice. And I was like, that is a great goblin voice. I have no idea how you do it, but it sounds great. I don't know whether it sounds very great on YouTube Live. It may just be really embarrassing. But that was Greb. And Greb kind of begged and pleaded with the players, oh, please, let me go. And basically, they let him go. And I thought, I wonder what would have happened to Greb in the ensuing years since his release, and near-death experience at the hands of the characters. I wonder what would have happened to Greb. Well, I think somebody who, if he was still alive, he'd probably have quite a lot of power and influence among goblin kind. I think if a goblin reaches 10 years old, they're probably doing pretty well. So I decided in designing this encounter that the entire group of goblins, this entire tribe of goblins that are attacking the players, almost 3 years later in real time, right? Nearly 3 years later. But in game time, it's something like 5 years later. 5 years. This goblin's been on the run, doing his own thing, and then just by pure chance, they encounter him in this mighty elven wood. And I designed this entire encounter to give the players a chance to reconnect to Greb. And it was ridiculous, and it was funny, and it was a fun campaign. And it was ridiculously easy. It was a really easy encounter. If they had wanted to, the players could have destroyed each and every one of those goblins with impunity, with maybe just a few hit points of damage here or there. A light scraping, let's be honest. But that encounter stayed and is memorable because it was fun. And it was easy. So I don't think it's an overly easy encounter that takes away fun. I don't think it's an overly hard encounter that takes away fun. I think fun is in how memorable a combat is. The way I think of it is, like, in the real world, encounters, especially violent encounters, for most people day to day, most people who are lucky enough to live in some semblance of civilization, we won't go into that, but for most people, a combat encounter is actually quite a rare thing. It's quite a rare thing to ever happen. Most people will go through their life and never have something like that happen. But when it does happen, it's always memorable. I remember an encounter I had that never turned to violence, but in this small little town that we live in, here in the southwest of England, where it's a bit like Hobbiton, really. It's just countryside and places called the Honington Arms and things like that, old taverns and things like that. And there's even a museum around the corner that has a dragon dungeon. And here, this kind of thing doesn't happen much, but I had an encounter with, let's say, a disadvantaged person who was causing some trouble on the high street. And I saw this person sort of almost becoming aggressive and almost physically aggressive with a shopkeeper that me and the kids know and love, and we go into their shop a lot. And I saw this happening. I was like, whoa, and I got in the middle of it, and I kind of moved the person on and all this kind of thing. Never turned to a physical encounter, although very nearly did. But here's the thing, I remember it. Not a single blow was exchanged. And so I don't always think, when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons, that violence needs to take place for an encounter to be memorable. Therefore, I'm not interested in challenge ratings versus the hit dice of my players or any of that kind of stuff. What I'm interested in are encounters that are memorable, that the players will never forget, and that maybe might just teach them something about themselves or about others. And to me, that is way more exciting than trying to get a balanced encounter that's perfectly balanced. Is pretty strong. That it'll be boring. I know it sounds weird because we work so hard to figure out challenge rating, and do we want the encounter to be moderate or hard or even deadly? And I'm not interested in that. What I'm interested in is that the encounters are memorable and that they are entertaining. Now, entertaining doesn't always mean fun, but that they're entertaining. So the Goblin encounter from episode 100 of campaign 1 was one that to me was an easy encounter. There was no balance there. We've got something like close to, let me think, off the top of my head, like 80 hit dice of experience in the characters and the NPCs that are on this boat going through the Elven Wood. I mean, they are, very little can beat them, right? Very little can beat them. And they get ambushed by a tribe of goblins, an entire tribe of goblins. And I thought to myself, this could be fun. And not only that this tribe of goblins is led by the goblin they let go 5 years before. What might happen? I thought it would be fun. And as it turned out, the players and the characters as well, but the players in particular, Charlotte and Finley, thought it was a hoot. And it became a very memorable encounter. Let's go the other way, and let's take a very hard encounter. Recently, this is going back only half a dozen episodes or so, our two players encountered a Tarrasque. It was Dunadorian, the Mindbreaker. Tarrasque is not, there's not only one Tarrasque in our campaign setting. This was one of many. And here was the thing. I thought, well, there is the potential that this Tarrasque could deal a lot of damage early on. And if the players aren't quite ready for this encounter and they don't get their defenses in order and all those kind of things, yeah, it could actually hurt them. It could hurt them significantly early on. Probably what I saw happening was that they would be able to rally, heal themselves, get themselves together, and then get some kind of strategy to overcome this Tarrasque. But as it turned out, Elwyn, played by my son Finley, Elwyn used the slow spell to great effect, and I also overlooked the addition to the saving throw that a Tarrasque gets on wisdom saves. A silly mistake. But here is the thing. As it turned out, this incredibly hard encounter was hard for reasons that I never foresaw. And that usually as Dungeon Master, you will not foresee. And again, this is why I think really trying to balance encounters is ludicrous and is probably a waste of time. Life isn't balanced. And I think if you throw leveled encounters at your players, and by leveled encounters, I mean just proportionate to their level of skill and bonuses and all that kind of thing. I think what you're really doing is more akin to a video game such as Skyrim. So in Skyrim, when you start out, we love Skyrim. Me and the kids love Skyrim. And actually, before the kids came of age to play Dungeons and Dragons, Skyrim was my one outlet to kind of expose them to fantasy role playing, right? Was through Skyrim. And you'll know this if you've ever played this game, that if you start out at level 1 in Skyrim and you meet a bandit, it's just a bandit. But if you meet a bandit and you're level 30 in Skyrim, it'll be a bandit marauder. What's the difference? Well, the bandit marauder is a lot tougher. It deals a lot more damage. But it's still basically a bandit. And as you actually go through, and by the way, it's not just with people and that kind of encounters. When you first start out in Skyrim, you'll meet a wolf. But later on, as you level up, you won't just meet wolves out and about on the path. You'll meet ice wolves that are multiple times more powerful than a regular wolf. So in this way, what the game does is it levels up the encounters as you level up. But there is always the sense with that things aren't quite real. They're not quite real. They're still challenging, but they're not real, right? And I think that's what separates a video game, tabletop role game, or one of the separates them, is that I don't want to just, as my characters level up, as my kids' characters level up, that I just throw harder and harder and harder and harder challenges at them. I mean, some of that has to happen for sure, but I'm also interested in how they're going to deal with challenges that are actually completely easy for them, that are not a challenge at all whatsoever. I'm really interested in how they'll deal with that, last Halloween, they actually encountered some hags as well in the wood that I knew was an easy encounter. But why did I throw it at them? I was interested with how they would deal with it and the fun that might come from that, the entertainment that can come from that. And so recently, the opposite was true. They got into a tussle with a Tarrasque. Is it really a tussle? Hell yeah, why not? They got into a tussle with a Tarrasque, and as a result of that, Charlotte, played by Charlotte is my daughter, who plays Danae, has the armor of invulnerability. So she triggers her armor of invulnerability so that she is immune for 10 minutes to all bludgeoning, piercing, slashing by anything non-magical. And as it turns out, I read the rules very closely, and the more I read them, the more it seemed to say, no, Tarrasque's attacks are not magical. I was like, oh, shit. And so Charlotte was immune to the attacks from this Tarrasque, and Finley also activated certain effects. He turned himself into a clay golem. Clay golems are immune to slashing, piercing, and bludgeoning by non-magical attacks. So I've got two characters, both of whom are basically immune to this Tarrasque's attacks. And it became, even though it was an incredibly hard encounter, it became tough in a different way. It became memorable in a different way, with both of them at one point swallowed. And it was bonkers. But how did I make that encounter entertaining? It wasn't by trying to balance it. If I was actually trying to do that, I'd have thrown something like a Tarrasque and then had some other smaller creatures that would somehow bypass some of the other effects that the characters were benefiting from. But I thought, I'm not trying to balance it here. I just want to see what happens and what it can reveal about their characters. Because when I got into my tussle, my real world tussle in our high street, it revealed something about me that I didn't know. And I don't say this to blow my own trumpet, far from it, but it showed me that actually if there's people I care about and they're being threatened, I'm not intimidated by somebody, and I'm willing to step forward. And that was interesting for me. And so I always think encounters can be massively valuable in what they reveal about your character. And so what happened was I had this Tarrasque go on the rampage and start to destroy elements and aspects of this dwarven complex. And so what I started to do was, I knew the Tarrasque even though it is so powerful, it didn't really pose much of a threat to my players. So I thought, well, what if this Tarrasque starts to pose an ever-increasing threat to these innocent citizens of this dwarven city that they were in at the time? And I thought, now that could be interesting. And so that's what I had the Tarrasque start to do, was actually create a destructive swath through the city and start to kill off scores and scores of these citizens. Suddenly, the players and their characters aren't so interested in, is this a balanced encounter? How quickly can we kill this thing? Is it easy or hard? But more, we have to take this down to save this city. There are people dying. And it became a very memorable encounter for that reason. So what do we learn from this? What can you take away from this to help you become a better dungeon master? Well, I would say it's this. Don't worry too much about trying to balance your encounters. Do you know what? Recently, without giving away too many spoilers for another campaign that I'm playing, I'm looking to see with my, I think they're second level characters, whether I can throw something ridiculously powerful at them. not with a view to them getting wiped out and it being a hard encounter, but just to help reveal something about their own characters to themselves and to see what it does to them and to see what choices they'll make when they are faced with an overwhelming encounter that could wipe them out in a single round easily. All that as well. Instead, think about what encounters you could create that would just be entertaining. Now, entertaining, remember, doesn't just mean laughs. Entertaining means all other sorts of things: provocative, challenging, fun for sure, but also encounters that can help your characters show more character. That's what I think a good encounter should do. What do you think? You think that's nonsense and that the challenge rating system and how you balance encounters that way is absolutely vital as a dungeon master? Let me know in the comments below. Or do you have other ideas about how you make your encounters as dungeon master for your players, you know, fun, memorable? In which case, I'd love to know. Remember, you can subscribe to our channel at any point by hitting the button somewhere under there with a bell on it. We would love to, you know, keep you up to date with our campaign, actual play, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons games that we basically broadcast edit free. We don't do any promotion. We're not professional voice actors from America. We're a family here in the UK that, in my case, have been playing Dungeons and Dragons since 1987. I started as a kid and started by playing with my family. And we're huge believers in family first when it comes to Dungeons and Dragons. And so I hope you enjoyed this episode of Behind the Screen. Look forward to seeing you in the next one very, very soon. Take it easy. Bye for now.